You won't believe what happened today in Miss Carter's class. The words echoed through the hallway, whispered from one student to the next, an undercurrent of disbelief laced with fear. The final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, but no one was heading home. Instead, they gathered, tight-knit clusters in corners and doorways, waiting for answers, searching for any sense of normalcy after the chaos of the last 20 minutes. Inside room 212, chaos was still unfolding. Teacher makes students write their fears, but one student's confession sends the whole class into panic. The words spilled from Jake's mouth, hurried, urgent, like someone desperately trying to make sense of the impossible. His friends crowded around him, each one wearing the same blank expression, a shared sense of unease settling over them. Jake had been sitting in the back of the classroom when it all started. He saw it happen, but even now, he couldn't quite believe it. Miss Carter, their usually calm and composed teacher, had asked them to write down their fears. A simple exercise, one that she'd done with every class for years. But today, it went wrong in a way no one could have predicted. We all took turns reading them out loud. Jake continued. Just like usual. I was nervous, not sure what to say. But then, he paused. His friends leaned in closer, waiting for the words that would make sense of the madness. Jake's eyes darted around the hallway, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Then it was Clara. She said something that made everyone freeze. Clara. Quiet. Unassuming Clara, the girl who sat in the second row and hardly ever said anything in class. She wasn't known for drama, or for drawing attention to herself. But when her words had left her lips, it was like the air had shifted, gone cold, thick, charged with something none of them could name. I don't know what happened, man. The room, everything just went silent after she spoke. Miss Carter didn't say anything for the longest time. It was like she was processing it, But her face, Jake's voice trailed off, as though even now he could see it. His friends exchanged uneasy glances. They'd heard rumors. They'd all heard the stories about Clara being different, being quiet in a way that made some people uncomfortable. But this was something else entirely. It was like she knew something none of us did. Jake said, his voice barely audible now, full of dread. She said something that made everyone think she was. He stopped abruptly, his eyes wide with terror. Jake, someone whispered from the crowd. What did she say? Jake's gaze flickered, and he shook his head, almost as if refusing to speak the words out loud. But he didn't need to. The air was thick with anticipation, each person holding their breath. It was the way she said it, Jake murmured. Like it was a warning. A warning none of us understood until it was too late. He stared at the ground, trying to force the words out, but they remained lodged in his throat, a knot of fear that wouldn't loosen. The group waited for the next piece of the story. But the question remained, what had Clara said? And why had it been enough to send the whole class into panic? Miss Carter had never thought of herself as an exceptional teacher. She wasn't the kind who needed to be the center of attention or stand out. She just did her job, showing up every day, doing the work, and hoping that at least a few of her students would learn something meaningful before they left her class. But this day had shattered everything. She had started the lesson the way she always did, calm, methodical, introducing a simple self-reflection assignment. She asked her students to write down their greatest fear. It seemed harmless enough, right? For most of the class, it had been just that. A few uncomfortable moments as they picked apart their deepest insecurities, fears of failure, rejection, and loss. Some were generic. Others were deeply personal. But nothing stood out until Clara. Clara had been sitting quietly, her pencil moving slowly across the page. Miss Carter had noticed the stillness in her posture, the way her dark hair framed her face, and the way she always seemed to be hiding something behind her wide, glassy eyes. But Clara was just like any other student, wasn't she? At least, that's what Miss Carter had thought before the confession. When it was Clara's turn, the class went quiet. A few students exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect. Clara wasn't one for attention, so this moment was already uncomfortable. But then she spoke, and the words she said, those words, those chilling, dissonant words, shook the room to its core. My biggest fear, Clara started, her voice almost too soft to hear. She paused, as if weighing the impact of what she was about to say. My biggest fear is that one of you is already dead. The room fell silent. Miss Carter had blinked, sure she hadn't heard correctly. But Clara had just stared ahead, her expression blank, as if she'd stated something as simple as the weather. The others in the class had shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some snickering nervously, but the laughter quickly died when Clara added, almost too casually, "I've seen them, you know. The ones who don't belong. The ones who aren't supposed to be here." The words hit like a punch. Miss Carter tried to speak, to make sense of it, but her voice caught in her throat. She glanced around the room, but her gaze kept returning to Clara. The class was now watching her intently, waiting for some explanation. But Clara didn't offer one. She just looked back at them with eyes so wide and distant that it was as though she weren't even there. And that was when the panic began to spread. Some students started to fidget, nervous laughter bubbling up. Others just stared at Clara, unsure how to react. But a few seemed to understand something that no one else had yet realized. Miss Carter cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the room, but her hands shook. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the walls were closing in. The whispering started, hushed at first, then louder. "Is she serious?" someone asked. "What does she mean? Already dead?" Miss Carter stood there, caught in the moment, unable to fully process what Clara had said or why it had made everyone so unnerved. The unease spread like wildfire. And then, in that moment, Clara's eyes, those strange, hollow eyes, met Miss Carter's. "I know you don't believe me, but you'll see," Clara said, her voice calm and unsettling. "You'll all see, before the end of the day." And just like that, the room fell into an eerie silence. The bell rang to signal the end of the period, but no one moved. Not even Miss Carter could bring herself to speak, trapped in some surreal limbo between disbelief and fear. The classroom emptied in slow motion, students leaving in ones and twos, still talking in low voices, casting worried glances back at Clara, who remained seated, staring at nothing. But as the last student filed out, Miss Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something deep and dark. The room felt wrong. Clara's words echoed in her mind. And though the rest of the class would try to move on, pretending it had been nothing, pretending it was just another odd remark from a quiet girl, Miss Carter couldn't escape the feeling that the truth, whatever it was lurking just out of sight. She glanced at the door, still wide open. What does she mean? And then, without warning, the lights flickered. The questions started, and they wouldn't stop. The lights flickered again, more insistently this time, casting the room in a dim, erratic glow. Miss Carter stood frozen at her desk, her hand still resting on the stack of papers she'd been grading. Her heart raced, her mind racing just as fast. What did Clara mean? How could a simple self-reflection exercise turn into something like this? And why was she still hearing the girl's voice in her mind, repeating that eerie line, "You'll all see," before the end of the day? Her breath caught in her throat as the classroom door slowly creaked shut. No one was left in the room. No one but Clara. A slow, steady knock at the door broke the silence. "Miss Carter," a voice called from the hallway. It was Olivia, one of the more outspoken girls in class. She had been sitting 2 rows behind Clara. "Yes," Miss Carter managed to respond, her voice sounding hoarse, even to her own ears. She couldn't shake the unease crawling under her skin. I just wanted to make sure Clara was okay," Olivia said, her tone tentative, as if she wasn't sure whether she should even be here. Miss Carter hesitated, looking back at the empty seat where Clara had been moments ago. The girl was gone now. Had she even left with the others? She glanced around the room. It was as if Clara had vanished, not just from her seat, but from the entire space. She was fine. She just said something strange, but she'll be okay, Miss Carter lied. She wasn't sure if she believed that herself. Clara hadn't seemed fine at all. Olivia stood there, lingering in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She looked to the side, as if looking for something, or someone, that wasn't there. Then, with a tight nod, she turned to leave. But before the door closed, Olivia looked back, her eyes wide with confusion. "You know she's right. You'll see, Miss Carter. Just wait. You'll see." The door clicked shut behind her, and once again, Miss Carter was alone in the room. But the weight of Clara's words, and Olivia's, pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. She sat at her desk, her fingers trembling as she picked up the papers. It was time to move on, she told herself. To forget it. To focus on the lesson plan for the rest of the day. But as her eyes scanned the student names on the papers, her mind kept circling back to Clara, to what she had said, to the chilling certainty with which the girl had spoken. "One of you is already dead." The words rattled in her mind, again and again, until they had no meaning left. The words turned into a question that gnawed at her insides. What if it wasn't just an odd remark? What if there was more to it? More than anyone in this school realized? The halls of Riverbrook High School were quieter than usual that afternoon. The buzz of students had died down, replaced by a strange, uneasy stillness. At lunch, Jake sat at his usual spot with his group of friends. He wasn't hungry, his appetite long gone after what had happened in Ms. Carter's class. He had spent the entire period trying to rationalize Clara's words, but it just didn't add up. What had she meant by that? And why hadn't anyone else seemed as freaked out as he felt? Across the cafeteria, Clara sat alone, her tray untouched. She was staring at the lunchroom door as if she were waiting for something or someone. Jake watched her, his eyes narrowing. There was something unsettling about the way she looked, as if she wasn't really there at all. Something about her seemed out of place, out of sync with the rest of the world. He felt a chill run down his spine, and before he could stop himself, he stood up, his legs moving on their own accord. "Jake, where are you going?" Olivia's voice pulled him back. I need to talk to her. "Clara, I need to know what she meant," he said quickly, without really thinking. "Are you sure? You heard what she said, right?" Olivia's tone was hesitant. "It's weird. We all felt it. But what if she... I don't know, she could be dangerous." Jake shook his head, brushing off her concern. "She's just messed up, Olivia. I think she just needs help. She's not dangerous." But Olivia's gaze lingered on Clara, her face pale. "I don't know, Jake. Something's wrong with her. And I don't think we'll understand what's going on until it's too late." Jake didn't listen. He was already walking toward Clara's table, his heart pounding. He had to know. Something about her words gnawed at him, refused to let go. There was a feeling in his gut that something was terribly, terribly wrong. When he reached Clara's table, she didn't look up. She didn't even acknowledge him. Her eyes were locked on the door, unblinking. "Clara," Jake asked, trying to steady his voice. "What did you mean? What did you say to Miss Carter?" Clara didn't respond. She didn't move. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she tilted her head toward him. Her lips parted, and Jake felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "It's too late," Clara whispered, so softly that Jake barely heard her. "You can't stop it. No one can. Not now." Jake's stomach churned, and he felt his heart beat faster. "What are you talking about?" "Stop what?" Clara didn't answer. She simply stared past him, her expression unreadable, her eyes dark as night. And in that moment, the lights flickered once more. Jake froze, his body tense as a cold wind seemed to sweep through the cafeteria, rattling the windows. He turned around, his eyes darting nervously across the room. But everyone else seemed oblivious. They continued eating, talking, laughing, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. The flickering lights stopped, and Clara finally stood, gathering her tray. Her eyes locked with his one last time, and her voice, low, hollow, sounded in his mind as clearly as if she had spoken it aloud. "You'll see, Jake, before the end of the day." And with that, Clara walked out of the cafeteria, leaving Jake standing there, paralyzed by the sense that something had just shifted, something terrible, something irreversible, and there was no way to stop it now. The question lingered in the air, unanswered. What was coming? The air in the cafeteria felt thick, stifling, as though the walls themselves were pressing in on Jake. He stood frozen, staring after Clara, unable to shake the feeling that something beyond his understanding was unfolding. He'd never seen her like this, never seen anyone like this. Her words, her eerie calm, the way she spoke about things as if she already knew what was going to happen. It was all wrong. For a moment, he thought about sitting back down at his table, trying to shake it off. Maybe it was just some weird phase, something that would blow over. But deep inside, he knew it wouldn't. Not this time. A low buzz of voices filled the space around him, but Jake's mind was far away. He walked slowly toward the exit, the hum of chatter fading into the background. He didn't even realize where his feet were taking him until he found himself standing in front of the school's library. Clara had left the cafeteria like she was already walking toward something. Jake needed to figure out where that something was, and fast. He pushed open the door to the library, and the familiar scent of old books washed over him. the musty pages a stark contrast to the fear rising in his chest. He scanned the room quickly, but Clara wasn't here. Where was she? Just then, the sound of pages turning reached his ears. He turned toward the back corner and saw Clara sitting at a table by herself, an open book in front of her. The air around her felt colder, even inside the library. Her hands were still, resting on the pages, but her eyes were unfocused, staring straight ahead as if lost in a thought too deep to share. He hesitated at the edge of the table, unsure if he should disturb her. But then, the urge to know, to understand, became too strong. He couldn't stand the tension gnawing at his insides any longer. Clara. Jake's voice faltered as he spoke her name, but she didn't look up. I didn't mean to scare anyone, Clara said, her voice so calm that it unsettled him even more. She still didn't meet his eyes. But I had to warn them. Warn them about what? Jake asked, his throat dry, his words tumbling out faster than he could think. What's going on, Clara? You said something's coming. What do you mean? Clara finally looked up, her gaze fixed on him. Her eyes, usually a dull brown, were darker now, more intense. It was like looking into an abyss. It's already here, she whispered. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to demand more from her, to push her for some kind of explanation, but something in the way she spoke stopped him. It wasn't fear he saw in her expression, it was resignation. You're not the only one who's been noticing, Jake, Clara continued, her voice still distant, but somehow clearer. The others, they know too. They're not talking about it, but they know. She paused, and a faint, bitter smile played at the corners of her lips. They're just pretending nothing's wrong. But it is. Jake swallowed hard. His mind was racing. Who's they? What do you mean? What's coming? Clara's eyes flickered toward the window, the sunlight filtering in, casting long shadows across the rows of bookshelves. The ones who don't belong. The ones who shouldn't be here. Jake felt his stomach drop. Are you talking about? I'm talking about the ones who died, Clara interrupted, her voice tightening. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The ones who aren't supposed to be in this school. But they're still here. They're still walking around. They look like us, but they're not. And they're getting closer. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating him. No, Jake whispered, shaking his head. This is crazy. Clara, I know you don't believe me. Her voice softened, but the intensity in her eyes never wavered. But you will. You'll all see. They've already found some of us. Jake felt his blood run cold. What do you mean? But Clara didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to the book in front of her, her gaze now focused on the pages. For a long moment, Jake stood there, the room spinning as the weight of her words settled over him. His heart hammered in his chest, and he could feel the sweat beading on his forehead. He had to get out of there. He needed to tell someone. But who would believe him? Who could? He turned to leave the library, his mind racing, but Clara's voice stopped him. It's already too late for some, she called after him, her voice strangely calm, even as the words sliced through him like a blade. Jake didn't stop. He ran. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Jake had barely managed to collect himself. His nerves were shot, his hands trembling. He'd spent the entire afternoon walking the halls, unable to shake the image of Clara's cold, unblinking stare. No one had seemed to notice anything strange, no one except him. But that didn't mean nothing was happening. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, and a message from Olivia flashed on the screen. Olivia, Jake, you need to meet me. Now. It's happening. His pulse quickened as he read the message. Something in her words sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He didn't hesitate. Without thinking, he grabbed his bag and bolted for the door. Whatever was happening, whatever Clara had been warning them about, it was no longer something he could ignore. He stepped into the hall and saw Olivia waiting by the front doors, looking over her shoulder like she was expecting something, or someone, to follow her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with dread. What is it, Olivia? Jake asked, trying to catch his breath. What's happening? Olivia's voice dropped to a whisper, though no one was around to hear. It's starting. I don't know how, but I think Clara was right. People are missing, Jake. I think. She stopped short, her eyes darting over his shoulder, her face blanching. Jake turned, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. And in that moment, he saw it. A shadow moved across the hallway, a figure, tall, thin, and wrong, in a way that made his stomach twist. The figure walked slowly, deliberately, its head tilted unnaturally, as if it were looking at him through the wrong lens of the world. And as it stepped into the light, Jake's breath caught in his throat. It had Clara's face, but it wasn't Clara. And in that moment, he realized that whatever Clara had been talking about, it wasn't a warning. It was a prophecy. What was happening? Jake's blood ran cold as the figure stood at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of the flickering fluorescent lights. His heart pounded in his chest, a constant, thudding reminder of the fear that gripped him. The figure, a tall, shadowy silhouette, wasn't just standing there. It was watching him. For a moment, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. Jake felt his legs lock, his body frozen by the weight of the realization that whatever Clara had been saying, whatever she had been trying to warn him about, it was happening right in front of him. Olivia's voice snapped him out of his trance, but it was shaky, filled with terror. "Jake, we need to move. Now." But Jake couldn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off the thing at the end of the hallway. She had Clara's face, but there was something about it that didn't belong. The way the eyes were too wide, too empty. The way the mouth curled into a grin that didn't feel like a smile at all. The skin, though pale, had a strange, almost translucent quality to it, like a wax figure too delicate for this world. It took a slow step forward. Jake's instinct screamed at him to run, to get out of there, but his feet felt as though they were glued to the floor. He glanced back at Olivia, whose face was contorted in fear. She was backing away from the figure, but there was nowhere for her to go. "Jake," she hissed urgently. "What are you waiting for? Move." The figure took another step closer. This time, its head tilted unnaturally, the bones creaking like they were breaking under the pressure. There was no sound of footsteps, just the eerie silence that made Jake's skin crawl. It was as though it was trying to get closer without making a sound, without drawing attention to itself. But it was impossible not to see. Impossible not to feel the dark, oppressive presence that radiated from it. And then it spoke. "Jake." "Olivia." The voice was hollow, distant, but unmistakably Clara's. "You should have listened." The words sent a jolt through him. The voice sounded wrong, too flat, too emotionless. But what was worse was the way it knew their names. The way it knew who they were, even though it had no business knowing anything about them. Olivia grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back as she whispered, "We need to get out of here. Now." Jake wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but there was no time. The hallway felt tighter, as if the walls were closing in. He could hear the thing moving toward them, its footsteps now audible, though somehow hollow, like they came from a place far deeper than the school's floor. Without thinking, he turned and ran. They didn't look back. Jake and Olivia sprinted down the hallway, adrenaline surging through their veins, but it felt like they were running in slow motion. The building around them, once familiar, safe, had transformed into something alien. The walls seemed to loom taller, casting long shadows across the floor. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting brief, disorienting flashes of brightness. "Where are we going?" Olivia gasped, her voice edged with panic. "I don't know. Anywhere but here," Jake yelled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They reached the stairwell and bolted up the stairs, not stopping until they reached the second floor. The farther they got from the hallway, the more they felt the pull of whatever was chasing them, whatever was following them. But when they reached the second floor, Jake stopped, his eyes scanning the corridor. "What is it?" Olivia asked, her voice full of fear. She could sense it too. Something was wrong. There was no sound, no voices, no other students. The hall was eerily quiet. "Something's off," Jake muttered, glancing around. And then it hit him, the realization that had been gnawing at the back of his mind. The silence. They had run, and they hadn't seen a single soul. No one in the classrooms. No teachers. Not even a janitor. Riverbrook High was a ghost town. Jake's stomach twisted. Where is everyone? Before Olivia could respond, a shadow darted across the far end of the hallway, and Jake instinctively stepped back. The figure was fast, too fast, just a blur, but he knew it. It was Clara's thing, the one that had been following them. But this time, it wasn't just standing still. This time, it was hunting them. They ran again, but the hall seemed to stretch longer, the walls closing in on them like some twisted funhouse. The air grew colder, colder still, and Jake realized with growing horror that the temperature was dropping fast. He turned to Olivia. "We need to get to the gym. It's the only place with enough exits. We can't let it corner us." Olivia nodded, though her face was pale with fear. "The gym's at the end of this hall, right?" Jake didn't have time to answer. A flash of movement caught his eye, and he swung his head toward it just in time to see a figure, another one, at the far end of the hall. A second one. This one was even closer. This one looked like her. "Run!" Jake shouted, grabbing Olivia's arm. "Run now." They broke into a sprint, but the gym door was still too far away. The second figure moved toward them with unnerving speed, closing the gap in a way that seemed unnatural. It was too fast. Jake and Olivia reached the gym door just as the first figure rounded the corner behind them. They slammed into the door, pushing it open with every ounce of strength they had. But as the door swung wide, the shadows in the gym seemed to swallow them whole. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving them trapped in darkness. Olivia stumbled, trying to catch her breath. "What do we do now?" Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was staring at something he hadn't noticed until now. The floor of the gym was covered with a thick layer of dust, untouched, unmarked, like it hadn't been used in years. And in the center of the gym, written in chalk on the floor, were 3 words. "It's too late." Jake's heart skipped a beat. And then, the sound of scraping metal came from the far corner of the room. Something was coming, and it wasn't alone. Jake turned to Olivia, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here. Now." But as they turned to run, the door they'd come through slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. And then, from the darkness, a voice echoed, low and cold, reverberating off the walls of the gym. "You should have listened." And the first figure appeared in the doorway. The air in the gym turned even colder, and Jake's breath fogged in front of him, like they were standing outside on a winter night. His heart raced, each beat pounding in his ears, and the weight of the moment settled on him like a crushing burden. There was no way out now. The gym, once a place of victory and celebration, had become their cage. The figure, Clara's distorted reflection, the one with her face but not her soul, stood motionless in the doorway. Its presence was suffocating. Its eyes, cold and black, never blinked, as though it wasn't even alive. And yet, there it was, taking slow steps forward, gliding effortlessly across the floor, like it didn't need to walk, like it didn't even need to breathe. "Jake!" Olivia's voice was barely a whisper, thick with fear. She grabbed his arm, her fingers trembling. What is that thing?" "I don't know." Jake whispered back, the words caught in his throat. His mind was spinning, trying to process everything. Clara's warning, the shadows in the hallway, the figure that wasn't Clara, but looked like her. He couldn't make sense of any of it. But one thing was certain, it wasn't human. The thing in the doorway tilted its head slightly, as if observing them. The eerie silence stretched on, making Jake feel like they were being suffocated by the weight of the unknown. Olivia moved closer to Jake, her voice cracking. "Jake, we need to get out of here. We can't stay here." Suddenly, the gym lights flickered, and the figure lunged forward. The movement was so fast, so sudden, that Jake barely had time to react. He yanked Olivia back just as the figure's hand, long, bony fingers, swiped through the air, missing them by inches. The force of the swing knocked over a stack of basketballs by the side of the gym, sending them bouncing loudly across the floor. Olivia screamed, and Jake pulled her closer, his mind a blur of panic. There was no escape, no way out. The figure's voice, Clara's voice, but flat and mechanical, came again, chillingly calm. "I warned you." Jake's stomach twisted as he realized the gravity of the situation. Clara wasn't just talking about some metaphorical danger. She had been right. This wasn't some strange daydream or prank. Something was happening, something terrible, and it was unfolding right before their eyes. "We need to think," Jake gasped, glancing around the gym for anything that could help them. The bleachers were pushed up against the far wall, and a door on the opposite side of the gym led outside. But that door was too far. The thing in front of them was getting closer. He pulled Olivia behind the nearest row of bleachers, his mind scrambling for a plan, anything to get them out of this nightmare. What if it's not just Clara? What if it's... But before he could finish his sentence, the figure moved again, faster than before. It darted across the gym, directly toward them. Its legs were impossibly long, its arms stretched unnaturally thin. Jake's body reacted before his brain did. He shoved Olivia behind the bleachers and turned to face the creature. The thing stopped just in front of him, and for the first time, Jake could feel the coldness of its presence, like the temperature had dropped to freezing. He could see the outline of its face, Clara's face, beneath the shadows, but the eyes were dark, empty pits. The grin, twisted and cruel, spread wider across its face. "You can't run," it said, and the words sent a chill down Jake's spine. "You can't hide. You should have listened." Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. His thoughts were a jumbled mess, but there was one question that kept coming back, louder than all the others. "Who are you?" The figure's smile grew, but there was no humor in it, only an unsettling emptiness. "We're what's left. We're the ones who came back, who weren't meant to. And now we're here, and you'll never leave." As the words sunk in, a terrifying realization spread through Jake's body like a wave of ice. He understood now, understood Clara's warning. This wasn't just about Clara. This was something bigger, something older. The figure reached out toward him, its fingers curling into a claw. Without thinking, Jake grabbed a nearby basketball and hurled it at the figure with all the strength he had left. The ball struck it square in the chest, but the thing didn't flinch. It didn't even move. Instead, it let out a low, inhuman growl, its head snapping toward Jake with terrifying speed. A sound, a faint, almost imperceptible scrape, came from the back of the gym, where the door to the storage room creaked open. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Another figure had entered. This one was different. This one was smaller. It wasn't tall or lanky like the other one, but its eyes glowed, an unnatural, sickly green, and it was staring right at Jake. "Olivia," Jake shouted, his voice hoarse. "We need to move. Now." He didn't wait to see if she followed. He bolted toward the gym's back door, his legs burning with the effort. His hands fumbled for the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. Behind him, the sound of footsteps grew louder, the unmistakable thud of heavy boots reverberating through the gym. Jake could hear Olivia's frantic breathing, but there was no time to check if she was okay. The first figure was closing in, its hollow eyes trained on him, and the smaller one was gaining fast. "Please, open," Jake cried, but the door wouldn't open. It wouldn't move. The figure in front of him reached out, and in that moment, Jake felt the sharpest, most intense cold of his life. It wasn't just the air, it was inside him, a deep, bone-chilling cold that made his skin feel like it was crawling off his body. The figure's hand hovered just inches from his face, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. "You should have listened," the figure repeated, its voice now a low hiss that filled the entire gym. "Now, you will join us." Jake's hand finally found the handle again, and with a final, desperate tug, he yanked the door open. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He could feel them, the cold, the presence, pressing in from all sides. But as he stumbled out into the dark, cold evening, the door slammed shut behind him, and the world around him seemed to hold its breath. A sickening realization hit him. He wasn't safe. None of them were. And Clara's warning echoed in his ears, louder than ever. "You'll see, Jake," before the end of the day. And as he ran, the shadows behind him grew longer, darker, and closer. The chase was just beginning. Jake's legs burned as he ran, the cold evening air slicing through his clothes like a blade. He didn't dare look behind him. He couldn't. He had to keep moving, had to stay ahead, but the feeling of those figures, those things that weren't quite human, pressed in on him like a shadow that wouldn't lift. It was as though the world around him had turned into a nightmare, and every step he took only made it worse. He heard Olivia's footsteps behind him, her ragged breathing growing more frantic with each passing second. She had to be close. He had to get her to safety, had to get out of this school before it consumed them both. But where? Where can we go? The parking lot was just ahead, and the sight of it, something normal, something familiar, should have been a relief. But instead, it felt like another trap. His eyes flicked over to the school's main entrance, the place they had just escaped, but he could feel the presence of those things, those monsters, closing in behind them. He turned sharply, his boots scraping against the gravel, and grabbed Olivia's arm. She stumbled slightly but caught her balance, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "We need to leave. Right now." Jake's voice was breathless, panicked. He looked over his shoulder, and for a split second, he thought he saw a shadow moving in the school's entrance, lingering just beyond the glass. It was Clara's figure, standing still, watching them with those dark, empty eyes. But it wasn't just Clara anymore. Jake's mind raced, the words Clara had said earlier echoing in his head. You'll see. Before the end of the day, he yanked Olivia toward the nearest row of parked cars, their footsteps almost lost in the pounding of his heart. But as they neared the first row, something made him stop. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and the icy fingers of fear crept up his spine. There was a car parked at the far end of the lot, an old sedan, its headlights on. But the car wasn't right. It wasn't just parked. It was waiting. Jake squinted through the darkness, trying to make sense of it, but the car seemed to pulse in the dim light, as though the shadows around it were moving in unnatural ways. Jake, what's wrong with that car? Olivia's voice trembled, and when he glanced at her, her face had gone ashen, her lips quivering with fear. But before Jake could answer, something worse happened. The figure, the one with Clara's face, but twisted, appeared on the far side of the parking lot. It wasn't walking now. It was floating, moving through the air like a shadow on a breeze. The sound of its movement was almost non-existent, but Jake could feel it, like a heavy pressure pressing down on the very air around them. Without a word, he grabbed Olivia's arm and sprinted toward the car, not caring which one it was. He just needed to get in. The keys. They needed the keys. As they reached the first car, he fumbled with the door handle, his hands shaking so violently that it took him several tries before the door finally clicked open. He shoved Olivia into the passenger seat, slammed the door shut, and practically threw himself behind the wheel. His fingers fumbled for the keys, his eyes darting nervously between the dashboard and the rearview mirror. Jake! Olivia gasped, her voice higher than usual, more frantic. What's happening? What's in the car? But she didn't need to finish. Jake could see it now. The car's interior was wrong. The seats were distorted, the steering wheel twisted at an angle, and blood, streaks of it, stained the windows. His breath caught in his throat as the car seemed to pulse once more, the darkness within it spreading across the dashboard like a living, breathing thing. The headlights flickered in a steady rhythm, casting eerie shadows across the parking lot. No, 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 Jake cried, slamming the door open and jumping out. He barely heard Olivia's scream as she followed him, but the fear was all-consuming now. They were too late. The car had been waiting for them, and they had walked straight into its trap. Jake turned around, feeling the sweat on his forehead. The world seemed to be collapsing around him. He could hear the rustling in the bushes, the whispering wind that wasn't natural, the faint sound of something scraping against the earth, coming closer. Closer. We need to go back inside the school, Olivia said suddenly, her voice sharp with a sudden, desperate clarity. We can't keep running. It's everywhere. We need to figure out what's happening. Jake shook his head violently, his thoughts racing. The school was no longer a refuge. It had become the place of their worst nightmare. But what other choice did they have? His eyes flicked back to the shadowy figure of the thing, Clara's face, hovering at the far side of the lot, just watching. Watching them. Come on. He grabbed Olivia's arm and pulled her along, moving toward the doors of the school, his pace quickening. The fear bubbling up in his chest threatened to overwhelm him, but he couldn't afford to break down now. He couldn't afford to think about how hopeless this all seemed. Inside the school, the lights flickered again, and a low groan echoed through the hallways, as if the very building was alive and sick. But they couldn't stop. There was no turning back now. The first figure appeared behind them as they entered the front door. The cold, hollow eyes locked onto Jake, and the air around them grew colder still. Olivia gasped and grabbed Jake's arm harder. What is that thing? What do we do? Before he could respond, the gym doors slammed shut behind them, and the echo reverberated through the empty halls. The others, the ones Clara had warned them about, were everywhere. And then, just as suddenly, the entire school went silent. Jake's mind screamed at him to move, to run, to fight, to do something. But the silence was suffocating. It felt like a veil had descended over the world, muting everything, their footsteps, their breathing, their very thoughts. And then, a voice echoed through the halls, as clear as if it were coming from right beside them. You should have listened. It was Clara's voice again, but it was distorted, warped by something darker. A chill ran down Jake's spine as a second figure stepped out of the shadows, And this time, it wasn't just one. There were three, and they all moved toward him in perfect, synchronized steps, their faces growing clearer in the dim light. And then, from somewhere above, the voice came again. "You will join us, all of you." Jake's blood froze. And then, just as the first figure reached out for him, the world exploded into chaos. The floor beneath Jake's feet trembled as the echo of Clara's distorted voice reverberated through the darkened hallways, rattling the very foundation of the school. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as the figures closed in on him and Olivia, their movements deliberate and slow, their eyes fixed, unwavering, like predators on the hunt. There were more than three now. Jake's gaze darted across the gymnasium doors, hoping for an escape, but the figures, those distorted versions of the students and teachers they had once known, were already blocking his way. The hallway was filling up with them, creeping from the corners, moving through the shadows like smoke, their faces more twisted than ever. Jake's breath came in shallow gasps. "Olivia, we have to do something," he hissed. "We can't just. Where do we go?" Olivia's voice cracked, barely above a whisper, her face pale with terror. "There's nowhere left." Jake had no answer. The fear that had once been a gnawing, constant thing had now become a full-bodied terror, the kind that paralyzed him, kept his legs rooted to the floor. But they couldn't stay here. They couldn't afford to stop moving. Then, the school's lights flickered once more, and the temperature dropped even further. The shadows surrounding them seemed to pulse, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. Jake felt a cold press on his chest, as though something had shifted, something vital, something that wasn't supposed to be here. And then it happened. The first figure lunged at them, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it slithered across the floor, its grin widening grotesquely. Olivia screamed and shoved Jake out of the way, but the thing was too fast, too wrong. It reached her before she could even react, its fingers wrapping around her wrist with an unnatural strength. Her eyes locked onto Jake's, filled with terror, as she tried to pull away, but it was futile. The thing was stronger, far stronger than she was. "Olivia!" Jake shouted, but his voice cracked, and he froze, unable to move as the figure yanked her toward it. The air seemed to vibrate, thick with a low, unsettling hum, as though something dark was feeding off their fear. The hallway stretched, the figures advancing at an agonizingly slow pace, and Jake's mind raced. His thoughts blurred together, but there was one thing that cut through it all. He had to save her. He had to do something. Without thinking, he lunged forward, the fear coursing through him. The raw, primal need to protect Olivia was stronger than anything else. He grabbed a nearby metal rod that had fallen off one of the gym equipment racks earlier and swung it with all his strength at the figure holding Olivia. It struck the creature's arm, but the impact was like hitting a wall. The figure didn't flinch, didn't react in any way. Instead, its hand tightened around Olivia's wrist with a sickening crack. "No!" Jake screamed, throwing the rod to the floor in desperation. Then, a terrible sound broke through the air, a shrill, high-pitched screech that made Jake's skin crawl. He spun around to see another figure, this one smaller, more human in shape, emerging from the darkness. But this one had no face. Its head was a blank void, an absence, like staring into a deep, endless well. The rest of its body was nothing but ragged, torn clothes and twisted limbs, but it moved like a human, its steps deliberate, as if it were studying him, learning his movements. The faceless thing moved toward them with alarming speed, and for the first time, Jake felt true panic, like something vital inside of him had snapped. He couldn't let this happen, not to Olivia, not to anyone. In a blur of motion, Jake grabbed Olivia's arm, yanking her free from the creature's grip. She gasped in pain, but Jake didn't let go. He wasn't sure how, but the terror that had paralyzed him before had finally fueled him into action. They ran. They ran down the hall, not knowing where they were headed, but certain that if they didn't keep moving, it would be over. The gym was behind them now, but the hallway stretched endlessly, turning into a maze of twisting corridors. It felt as though the school itself had transformed into something else, something alive, something hungry. The figures were everywhere, and no matter how fast Jake and Olivia ran, it never seemed enough. The gym doors, the classroom doors, every doorway and window seemed to open to more shadows, more twisted faces, more cold emptiness. Jake! Olivia gasped, her breath coming in short, desperate bursts. We need to get out of here. This is too much. I know. He breathed, his voice tight with fear. We just need to find. But then, as they rounded a corner, they stumbled into the school's main lobby, and the realization hit them like a punch to the gut. There, in the center of the lobby, was the thing that had been haunting them all along. Clara. Or, rather, the thing that had once been Clara. Her face, if it could even still be called a face, was barely recognizable, her skin stretched tight, her eyes hollow pits that seemed to swallow the light around her. But it was her grin that froze Jake in place, wide, gaping, stretched impossibly far across her face, like it was too big for her skull. Her body seemed to flicker in and out of focus, as if she were both here and somewhere else at the same time. The air around her crackled with the same oppressive presence that had followed them through the hallways, and for a brief moment, Jake thought he saw something else, something behind her. A shape, shifting in the darkness, indistinct but huge, towering over them. Clara, if that even was still Clara, turned to face them, her head tilting unnaturally to one side, the bones creaking. You can't run anymore, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Jake's stomach twist. You should have listened, Jake. You should have listened to me. Jake's pulse raced, but before he could move, the shadows around them deepened. The floor beneath them cracked with an audible snap, and suddenly, the ground gave way. Everything happened too quickly. The world dropped out from beneath them, and before Jake could even register the sensation of falling, the floor crumbled, and they were plunged into darkness. When Jake's head finally stopped spinning, he blinked against the inky blackness that surrounded him. He groaned, disoriented, feeling the cold stone beneath him. He was still holding Olivia's hand, but the air was thick, suffocating, and everything felt wrong. Olivia, he called out, his voice hoarse. No answer. Panic gripped him as he pushed himself up, his hands shaking. His heart raced in his chest as he reached for Olivia, but she wasn't there. He was alone. The sound of scraping echoed through the blackness, and then a voice, soft, like a whisper on the wind, reached his ears. You're all mine now, Jake. The voice sent a chill down his spine. He spun around, but there was no one there. Just the shadows. And the deeper he listened, the more he understood. He was never supposed to leave this place, and it was only just beginning. Would Jake and Olivia escape the nightmare that Riverbrook High had become? The answers lay hidden in the dark. The cold stone floor beneath Jake's hands felt as though it were freezing him to the ground. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. The darkness enveloped him like a suffocating blanket, and despite the terrifying silence that surrounded him, Jake felt like he was being watched. Every inch of the black void felt alive, an entity that was aware of his every move, every breath. Olivia. His voice was barely more than a croak, but he could hear the tremor in it, the fear that hadn't fully settled, even after all that had happened. No response. His fingers brushed the cold ground again, searching for anything, any sign of her. The sound of his own breath was deafening in the darkness. He felt a surge of panic rising in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He couldn't lose control. Not now. The silence around him felt wrong, oppressive. The shadows shifted subtly, as though they were not mere shadows, but something living. He tried to stand, but his legs felt weak, his body too heavy, as though it were being dragged down into the floor. Olivia. His voice cracked this time. Desperation edged his words. Where was she? The scrape of metal echoed in the darkness, a faint sound, like nails on stone. Jake's head snapped toward it, but there was nothing, just the thick, suffocating blackness. It was almost like the sound was coming from inside his own head. He swallowed hard, pushing himself to his feet, trying to steady himself. Then came the whisper. Soft. A voice that seemed to come from all around him, filling his ears with its chilling presence. She's already gone, Jake. Jake froze. The voice wasn't Clara's, but it was something worse. It was cold, impersonal, like it didn't care whether he lived or died. The kind of voice that knew things, had seen things that Jake couldn't possibly begin to understand. The ground beneath him shifted again, and his stomach lurched. The shadows seemed to curl, stretching toward him as if they had a mind of their own. And then, just as suddenly, a small sliver of light flickered through the void. A pale, weak light, like the distant glow of a dying star. Without thinking, Jake started toward it. His feet stumbled across the uneven ground, his body feeling more out of sync with each step, but the light, so faint, yet so promising, was pulling him forward. Then the whispering returned, louder now, closer. "You can't escape, Jake." Jake ignored it, pushing himself harder toward the light, desperate for anything that might offer him some kind of hope, some way out of this nightmare. As he drew closer, he saw something in the distance, shapes, figures, distorted and shifting, but he couldn't quite make out their forms. His body grew heavier with each step, like he was wading through thick, suffocating fog. The light ahead grew brighter, and for a split second, he thought he saw Olivia's face, just her face, her eyes wide with fear, her lips parted as though calling his name. He reached out instinctively, his hand grasping at the air, but the vision was gone as quickly as it had appeared. His heart sank. No, he couldn't lose her. Not like this. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air, so loud that Jake stumbled backward, his pulse racing. It was Olivia's voice. "Jake!" He whipped around, his breath ragged. Her voice, her real voice, had come from behind him, faint but unmistakable. It was the sound of someone in pain, someone lost. Without thinking, Jake turned on his heel and ran toward it, his legs moving faster than they ever had before, the light behind him flickering and fading. The whispering voice had quieted now, replaced by the growing scream that cut through the thick darkness. "Olivia!" Jake's voice cracked as he ran, his feet slapping against the cold stone. He had to get to her. He had to save her. And then, there, the faint glow of a door in the distance. The source of the scream. He surged forward, but as he got closer, something stopped him, like an invisible barrier, a sudden weight pressing on his chest. And then he saw it. The door was no longer a door. It was a wall, seamless and smooth, as though it had never been there to begin with. The light was gone. The shadows were returning, thicker and heavier than before. No, 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 no. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears as he slammed his fists against the smooth stone, but it didn't give. The wall didn't budge. He screamed, his voice ragged with desperation, his mind spinning as he looked around. "Olivia," he shouted. "Where are you?" The darkness swallowed his words, and for a long, painful moment, he felt truly alone. And then, from somewhere in the distance, the voice came again, softer now, but full of malice. "She's gone, Jake. There's no saving her now." It was Clara's voice, but it wasn't Clara. Not anymore. It was the thing that had taken her. The thing that had taken everyone. Jake's heart twisted, but then, he heard it again. A soft whimper, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder. He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the shadows. And there, at the edge of the blackness, was Olivia. She was crouched on the ground, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her lips moved, but no sound came from her mouth. Her hands were shaking, her fingers brushing against the floor like she was trying to reach something or someone. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Olivia." She looked up at him, her eyes empty, vacant, as though she wasn't truly there. "No, no, no, no," Jake murmured, shaking his head as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Olivia," his voice was hoarse with fear. He reached for her, his hands trembling as they brushed against her cheek. But Olivia didn't respond. She was looking past him now, her gaze unfocused, lost in the shadows. And then, her lips parted, barely a whisper. "He's coming for you." Jake's eyes widened. Who? Who was coming? Before he could process the question, the shadows in the distance moved. A shape, dark and elongated, slithered forward, the air around it growing colder, denser, like it was dragging the very essence of life from the space around them. It was towering, impossibly tall, its form indistinct, its edges blurring like it didn't belong in this world. Jake couldn't move. The fear in his chest felt like a vice, squeezing the breath from his lungs. The thing was moving closer, and Olivia, was staring directly at it, her eyes fixed in that same vacant, lifeless way. A voice, deeper, darker than anything Jake had heard before, reached his ears. "You were warned, Jake." The shadows around him shifted, and as the thing reached for him, Jake realized, with a cold certainty, that it wasn't just the school that had changed. It was him, and it was too late. The thing wasn't just after Olivia. It was after them all. And the hunt had only just begun. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last, as the shadow in front of him grew closer, its dark form stretching unnaturally across the floor. The air around him thickened, pressing in on him like the weight of the world. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to move, to run, to do anything, but his legs refused to obey. The sheer presence of the creature in front of him felt like a suffocating pressure, as though every ounce of hope had been drained from the space around him. Olivia's voice, barely a whisper, cut through the dense silence. "Jake!" Jake looked at her, his heart aching. She was still there, but something about her eyes, something about the way she was staring past him, into the nothingness, sent a fresh wave of terror rushing through him. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice trembling, but she didn't respond. Her lips were moving, but there were no words, only faint, breathless exhalations. Her gaze remained fixed on the figure that was drawing closer, closer still, until the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. The shape, this thing, was towering now, its form shifting, warping with every second. It seemed to move, not in a straight line, but as if it existed between dimensions, a dark blot in the fabric of reality itself. Its edges blurred, and for a moment, Jake wondered if it was even truly real. Was it something that could be touched? Or was it some twisted manifestation of fear, of darkness? No, it was real. It was here. The voice, deep, echoing, rose again, sending a shiver down Jake's spine. "You should have listened. You cannot escape what you have become." The words were cold, void of any emotion, but they hit Jake like a slap to the face. Escape? What had he become? Was this what Clara had meant? What she had warned them about? "Olivia, please," he begged, shaking her gently. His hands were still trembling, but this time, he didn't care. He had to reach her. He had to wake her up from whatever nightmare she was trapped in. Her head twitched slightly, as if she were trying to focus on him, but her eyes remained distant, glazed over with the empty look she had worn ever since she had been pulled into this place. Jake's breath hitched as he felt a sinking sensation in his stomach, a realization that something was happening, something worse than he could possibly understand. The creature, the shadows, the emptiness around them, it was as if they were being consumed by something older than fear itself. The darkness around him crept closer, its cold fingers curling tighter around him. The thing in front of him, the shape with the indistinct features, no true face, no identity, was not just standing still anymore. It was moving, reaching out, and in that moment, Jake realized that it wasn't just coming for him. It was coming for all of them. "You have been chosen," the voice rumbled again, the words vibrating in the very air around them. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a choice. It was a declaration. Jake's stomach twisted. "What do you want from us?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his terror. "Why us?" For a moment, the shape paused, its shadow growing deeper and more expansive. It seemed to study him, or at least, Jake imagined it did. The lack of a face made it impossible to know for sure. But then, the voice answered, this time, in a tone that wasn't cold, but almost satisfied. "You were never meant to escape," it said. "You were never meant to live beyond this place." Jake's mind reeled, trying to process the words. "What do you mean?" And then, the truth hit him, clear and devastating, like a sharp slap. The realization that had been gnawing at the edges of his consciousness finally snapped into focus. This wasn't just about Clara. This wasn't just about Olivia. This was about everyone. The school. The town. They had all been chosen. This thing had been pulling the strings all along, working through fear, through shadows, through their very minds. It was feeding on them, on their fear, on their confusion, on their terror, and it wasn't just content with taking one or two. It wanted more. It needed more. And now, Jake understood. He wasn't just running from a monster. He wasn't just trying to save Olivia. He was running from the very thing that had been controlling them, that had been feeding on them. The school itself. With every moment they spent in this place, the shadows grew stronger, and no one would be spared. His thoughts were interrupted by Olivia's voice, her whisper breaking the silence. "Jake." Her words were faint, barely audible, but they carried a weight that made his heart leap into his throat. She was awake, or at least aware again. Jake's hands reached for her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Olivia?" Are you okay?" She blinked, slowly, her gaze still distant but now more focused, as if something terrible, was beginning to break through the fog. Her lips parted, and her voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. It's here. Jake. It's always been here." Before he could respond, a sharp sound broke the air, a low, guttural growl from the depths of the shadow, so close now that the air around them seemed to hum with it. The figure, the thing, was no longer a distant threat. It was right in front of them, towering, looming. "No," Jake whispered, his body trembling. "Not like this. Not now." Olivia's face was pale, her lips trembling as she whispered again, her voice barely audible but full of understanding. "We have to end it. Before it ends us." Jake turned to her, his mind swirling with fear and disbelief. "How?" Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, they shared a quiet understanding. She knew. She had known, just like Clara had, but she hadn't been able to say it until now. Olivia reached out, grasping his hand with surprising strength, her fingers cold but firm. "We have to go back." "What?" "Back to the school." Jake's voice was strained, but Olivia nodded. "Back to where it started. Where it began." Jake didn't understand, but in that moment, he realized there was no other choice. They had to go back. The shadows began to close in on them, and the growl of the creature grew louder. It was inevitable, but maybe, just maybe, there was one last chance to end it all. With a final breath, Jake gripped Olivia's hand tighter. He didn't know what was coming next, or what they would have to face, but he did know one thing. They couldn't run anymore. It was time to face whatever had been waiting for them in the heart of Riverbrook High. And as the darkness pressed in, he stepped forward. Together. The moment Jake stepped forward, the shadows seemed to shudder, like the darkness itself had been disturbed by their movement. Every part of him screamed to run, to escape, to find a way out of this nightmare. But Olivia's hand in his gripped him with a surprising certainty. She was right. There was no running. Not anymore. The creature, that dark, towering figure, loomed just ahead. Its form seemed to flicker in and out of reality, as if it weren't fully anchored in this world. The cold around them intensified, a chill that seeped into their bones, suffocating them with the weight of an unseen presence. Jake could barely breathe, his chest tight with fear, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Olivia's whisper cut through the tension between them, her voice steady, but full of something dark, a strange, knowing calmness that felt out of place in the middle of this madness. "We need to find the heart of it. The source." Jake barely had time to process her words when the figure lunged forward, moving with an unnatural speed. The air seemed to distort around it, as though it were folding reality itself, and the ground beneath them trembled with its presence. "Olivia, move!" Jake shouted, pulling her behind him. He could feel her trembling, but her grip on his hand didn't falter. She was still with him, still fighting. Together, they turned and bolted down the dark hallway, the thudding of the creature's steps echoing behind them like a drumbeat of doom. It was too close. They weren't fast enough. The sound of the shadows snapping around them was deafening, and Jake could hear the low growl of the thing, its presence pressing down on them with every step they took. "We have to find it, Jake," Olivia screamed, her voice rising above the chaos. "It's in the heart of the school, where it all began." Her words felt like a lifeline, even as the darkness threatened to swallow them whole. She was right, he realized. This wasn't just happening by chance. This place, this school, was a part of the nightmare. It was the key. The walls, the hallways, the classrooms. Everything had been part of this malevolent force that had twisted its way through their world. They had to go back. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed Olivia's wrist and yanked her to the left, towards the stairwell that led to the upper floors. He didn't know what he was hoping for, didn't know what he thought they could find. But there was something in the way Olivia had spoken, in the urgency of her voice. Something told him that they weren't running from the creature anymore. They were running toward it. The stairwell was dark, the steps creaking beneath their feet as they raced up, heartbeats pounding in time with their steps. As they reached the second floor, a door at the end of the hallway swung open, the wind that billowed through it cold and unnatural. Without a word, they ran toward it, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls, blending with the distant growls and the hiss of shifting shadows. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, but the door was drawing closer, and as they reached it, The cold air intensified, curling around them like a serpent. Olivia stopped just before the door, her hand tightening on Jake's. "This is it," she whispered. Jake nodded, his throat tight. The fear that had been a constant companion since the beginning of this nightmare was now mingled with something else, a sense of resolve, of finality. He was done running. He didn't know what lay on the other side of that door, but he had no choice. The door groaned as Jake pushed it open. Inside, the room was suffocatingly cold. It was vast, the walls lined with strange, flickering symbols carved deep into the stone. The air smelled damp, ancient, like dust and decay. But what took Jake's breath away was the center of the room. At the heart of it all was a large, blackened stone altar. On top of it were twisted, decayed remnants of something that had once been alive: bones, tattered clothing, the remnants of old, faded faces. It was wrong. Everything about this place felt wrong. "The source," Olivia whispered again, her voice trembling as she took a step forward. "This is it. This is what's feeding it." The shadows shifted around them, writhing like living creatures. The creature that had been chasing them was still out there, waiting, lurking in the dark corners of the room, but the true horror was before them. The altar, the thing that had anchored this nightmare to their world. Jake's eyes scanned the symbols on the walls, the cryptic markings glowing faintly in the darkness. He could feel the weight of their meaning pressing down on him, as though they were not just symbols, but a curse, a binding that had kept this entity trapped in the world for far too long. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just bad luck that had pulled them into this nightmare. The school had been built here for a reason. This room, the altar, it was a place of power. And the creature, the shadow that had been hunting them, it was the guardian of this place. Olivia's hand tightened around Jake's again, but this time, there was no fear in her grip. Instead, there was something else: acceptance. "We end it now," she said quietly, the words full of the same resolute calmness that had been in her voice earlier. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the altar. Jake didn't know how she knew what to do. He didn't know what they were supposed to do. But in this room, surrounded by the decay of what had once been living, there was only one way forward. He stepped with her. They both approached the altar, their movements synchronized, their hearts pounding as the shadows shifted around them, drawing closer. And then, the voice came again, louder, closer, almost inside their heads. "You cannot stop it. You will be consumed, just like the others. You were never meant to survive." Jake's breath caught in his throat. But this time, there was no fear in his heart. There was only defiance. "We will stop you," he said, his voice steady, more certain than it had ever been. He didn't know how, but he knew this. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had been swallowed by this place, everyone who had fallen victim to the darkness. And with that, something shifted inside Jake. The symbols on the wall began to pulse, the shadows shuddered, and the air grew heavy with power. Together, they raised their hands toward the altar, and in that moment, a flash of light exploded around them. The room shook with a deafening roar, and the darkness seemed to implode, as if the walls themselves were splitting apart. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the shadow, the thing, screamed. And for the first time since the beginning, the light broke through the darkness. Did Jake and Olivia manage to end the nightmare and free the town from the darkness? The final answer lay in the heart of Riverbrook High. But the shadows, they would always be there, lurking, waiting for the next chapter. The light that exploded from the altar was blinding. For a split second, Jake felt the world around him shatter, like the very fabric of reality had been ripped apart. The shadows that had pursued them, consumed them, and haunted every inch of Riverbrook High seemed to recoil, retreating from the blinding force that surged from the center of the room. Jake squeezed his eyes shut, instinctively shielding his face with his arm. The light seared his skin, but it wasn't painful. It was cleansing, purging the very darkness that had been suffocating him. The room trembled, the symbols on the walls flickering, their ancient glow growing stronger, as if the altar itself had come alive. Olivia's grip on his hand tightened, and in the chaos, he could feel her pulse, steadying, even though the air around them felt like it was coming apart. The sound that filled the room wasn't just the roar of the shadows retreating. It was something more, a low hum, a vibration that seemed to reverberate through their bones. Then, as quickly as it had started, the light receded, leaving behind a deafening silence. Jake opened his eyes slowly, blinking away the afterimage of the brilliance. He could feel the change. The darkness that had suffocated the building, the creature that had hunted them, all of it, gone. For the first time, the air felt lighter, less oppressive, less cold. Olivia took a deep, steadying breath beside him. He turned to her, and they both shared a look, a moment of shared understanding. The nightmare, at least for now, was over. The room had changed too. The altar, once dark and twisted with the remnants of something long dead, was now quiet. The symbols on the walls had dimmed, their glow extinguished, leaving the room in its original, mundane state. The air no longer held the weight of the creature's presence. For a brief moment, Jake allowed himself to believe it was over, that they had done it, that they had stopped whatever had been festering in Riverbrook High for so long. But just as hope began to swell in his chest, a voice, a low, guttural whisper, slithered through the air, a sound so familiar that it sent a chill down his spine. "You think this is over?" Jake froze. The darkness wasn't gone. It was still here. Olivia's grip on his hand tightened, and she looked at him, her face filled with dread. "No, it's not over, is it?" Jake shook his head, his eyes scanning the now familiar room. The light had faded, but there was still a presence here, a lingering force, a consciousness that refused to let go. And then, like a shadow taking form, the creature appeared again, though not in its full, towering shape. This time, it was smaller, crouched on the floor like a predator waiting to strike. Its face, Clara's face, was twisted, as though mocking them, but there was something more in its eyes. It was no longer just the creature. It was the source. "You cannot kill what has no form, Jake." The voice, now distorted and fractured, rumbled from the thing's mouth. "This place, this school, it was built for me. I am part of it, and it is part of me. You cannot destroy what is already inside of you." The thing crawled toward them, its hands scraping along the floor as it moved, its fingers elongated and sharp. Olivia backed away, her breath shallow and quick, but Jake stood still. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a creature. It wasn't just a curse. Riverbrook High had been the anchor all along. It had been the vessel that had brought the darkness into this world. And that darkness wasn't going anywhere. "But we can stop it," Jake said, his voice hoarse but filled with a new resolve. "We can still stop it. We just need to destroy the source." The thing stopped its advance, tilting its head to one side like it was considering his words. For a brief moment, there was no sound, no movement. Just the oppressive weight of the room pressing in on them, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Olivia stepped forward, her eyes locked on the creature. "The altar." Her voice was steady now, filled with understanding. "We destroy the altar. The heart of it all. That's the key." Jake looked at her, realization dawning in his eyes. She was right. They had to destroy the altar, the true source of the darkness, the heart of whatever had been feeding off the fear, the terror, the hopelessness of Riverbrook High. It was their only chance. Without thinking, Jake pulled Olivia with him as they moved toward the altar. The creature, the thing, screamed, its voice a shrill, guttural wail that sent shivers down their spines, but they didn't stop. The room seemed to warp around them as they neared the stone slab, the symbols on the walls flickering back to life, their glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Jake's hand trembled as he reached for the altar, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. The symbols beneath his touch began to shift, to twist, and in that moment, he knew that this wasn't just about physical destruction. This wasn't just about smashing something with a hammer or tearing it apart. They had to break the connection. "Now," Olivia said urgently, her voice low and filled with fear. She didn't need to say more. Jake understood. He closed his eyes, focusing all of his energy on the altar, on the cold, decayed remnants of whatever dark force had bound this nightmare to their world. And then, as if on instinct, he placed both hands on the stone. "We break the bond," Jake whispered, his voice steady. The room shuddered, and the creature's screams grew louder, more frantic. It was as if the very walls were alive, fighting against them. But they couldn't stop. Not now. The altar vibrated beneath his touch, the symbols on the stone glowing brighter with every passing second. And then, with a deafening crash, the stone shattered. It was as if the world itself was torn apart. Jake and Olivia were thrown backward, the force of the explosion of light and sound throwing them to the floor. The creature, the thing that had been haunting them, screamed in agony, its form flickering violently as the bond was severed. The room itself groaned in protest, the walls cracking as if the very foundation of the building was being torn down. Then, in an instant, the light blazed through the room. The creature's form collapsed into nothingness, disintegrating into a cloud of dark dust that vanished into the air. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long lifted in a single, breathless moment. The darkness was gone, and with it, the nightmare. Jake slowly sat up, blinking against the remnants of the light that had surged through the room. The air felt different now, lighter, free of the suffocating presence that had filled the school. He looked at Olivia, who was still on the floor beside him, her face pale but filled with something else, relief. The world had shifted. The darkness was gone. Riverbrook High was no longer a prison. "We did it," Jake whispered, his voice still shaky with disbelief. Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with exhaustion but also with triumph. "It's over. It's really over." And for the first time, Jake believed it. They had ended it. But as the dust settled and the light returned to the world, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was only dormant. They had won. For now. But the shadows, like the nightmares they had faced, were never truly gone. They would always be lurking, waiting for the next time they were needed. But that was a story for another day. For now, they had won. And that was enough. As the silence in the room deepened, Jake and Olivia sat there, catching their breath, still processing the chaos they'd just survived. The world around them seemed to be returning to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after what had happened. The light that had pulsed through the room was fading, leaving behind only the remnants of a world that felt both foreign and familiar. But as the dust settled and they slowly stood up, Jake couldn't shake that feeling, the nagging sensation that something still wasn't quite right. The walls, the floor, the air around them all felt lighter, yes. But they felt empty, like they were just waiting for something to fill the void. The creature, whatever it had been, was gone. The altar was broken. Riverbrook High was free, but the scars of what had happened remained. "Is it really over?" Jake asked softly, his voice barely a whisper, as if saying the words aloud might make them less true. Olivia, still trembling slightly from the experience, nodded but didn't say anything at first. She looked around the room, her eyes searching for something. Jake followed her gaze, and his stomach churned as he realized what she was looking at, the empty altar, the remnants of the creature that had been haunting them, the cracks in the walls that now seemed to stretch farther than they should. "I don't know," Olivia said after a long pause, her voice low. "It feels like it's over. But something doesn't feel right." Jake's mind was racing. He could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air between them. They had broken the altar. They had destroyed the source. But had they really stopped it? Or had they simply severed the connection to something that would return again in a different form? Olivia turned to face him, her eyes dark with uncertainty. Do you think it could come back?" Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know. But I think we've only seen the beginning of something much bigger. That thing, that force, it was tied to this place. To Riverbrook. And it's not just going to disappear. It can't be that easy." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His heart still raced, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything, to losing everyone. But as the world around them seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, Jake realized the truth. They had won for now. They had saved themselves. And Riverbrook High? It had been purged. At least for now. "But we made it through," he added, trying to bring some form of hope back to his voice. "We did end it." Olivia smiled faintly, but it was tinged with sadness. "Yeah, we did. But I don't know if that means we're safe." Jake nodded. "No one's really safe from something like this. It doesn't just go away. It waits. It feeds. So, maybe it's over for us, at least for now, but it doesn't mean the town's in the clear. And what if there are others like it? What if we're not the last ones to face it?" The weight of his words settled heavily between them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself to feel the depth of the battle they had just fought, and the quiet, lingering fear that it wasn't truly over. A long silence passed before Olivia broke it, her voice quieter than before. "Do you think there are more of us out there? People who survived? People who have been touched by it?" Jake didn't answer right away. He didn't have an answer. He didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't let this thing fester again. The next time it came, it could be far worse. Maybe, Jake said after a long pause. Maybe we'll find them. Maybe we'll stop it before it grows again. But we have to be ready. The room felt quieter now. The weight of the battle had left them, but there was still an undertone of urgency in their voices. Jake and Olivia exchanged a brief, understanding look, something that conveyed the weight of what they had just done and the fact that they weren't done yet. Suddenly, the door to the room creaked open, the soft sound like a whisper cutting through the heavy air. A shadow filled the doorway, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't the creature. It was a person, Clara. Her face was pale, her eyes wide but soft. The strange emptiness that had surrounded her earlier seemed to have faded, and there was something almost peaceful in her expression, like the weight of whatever she had been carrying had finally been lifted. Clara, Jake said, his voice cracking with exhaustion. Are you okay? Clara stepped into the room, her footsteps slow and measured. She nodded, but there was something else behind her eyes, something that spoke of everything she had witnessed, everything she had been through. I'm fine, she said quietly. But I wasn't alone. There are others like me. And we need to stop it, Jake. We can't just leave. Not yet. There's more we have to do. Jake exchanged a look with Olivia. It was as though Clara had confirmed their worst fear, that this wasn't truly over, that it had only just begun. Clara walked toward them, her eyes locking with Jake's, as if she could see the thoughts running through his head. I saw what happened here. I saw what it did to you too, but I also saw what it did to everyone else. What it's still doing. And I think we need to find the others, Jake. There are more of us out there. And together, we can end this. Jake took a step toward her, his mind still reeling, but a new, quiet determination taking root inside him. Where do we start? Clara's lips curled into a small, grim smile. We start by finding the ones who are still hidden, the ones the shadows haven't touched yet, and we make sure they're ready. Olivia stood beside him, her voice steady but laced with the uncertainty that still lingered. You think we can stop it, really stop it? Clara nodded, her expression serious. I don't know, but we have to try. And this time, we need to be ready for what's coming. The silence in the room deepened as they stood there, absorbing the weight of what Clara had said. It was clear now, this battle was far from over. But they were ready. They had to be.